I want to bring in a panel of experts for this hour. HLN host Jane Velez-Mitchell, clinical and forensic psychologist Judy Ho, and criminal defense attorney and former Atlanta prosecutor Philip Holloway. Philip, we visited some of these websites and the material. It's disturbing to say the very, very least. What do we know about Harris's connections to these sites?
Well, what we know is what was released at the preliminary hearing a couple of weeks ago in a courtroom in Cobb County. What police have told us is that they have uncovered evidence that he at least visited those sites. What we don't know yet is whether or not his visiting those sites can be directly connected to the death of his child. If so, many observers have felt that what that points to is the prosecutors are painting a picture of premeditation, deliberation, and might be preparing to present an indictment to the Cobb County grand jury charging him with malice murder.
Philip, you seem to think that they're lining it up for harder and more substantial charges to come down the road. I take it that means a more substantial penalty.
Well, what they've said was right now they're proceeding on the theory that it was at a minimum criminally negligent for him to have left his child in that car under those circumstances. Nevertheless, the detective said at the preliminary hearing that it's looking, at least to him, like this might be intentional. If so, that points to premeditation and deliberation. And that's why we saw them, I think, out there looking into the precise conditions under which this child died in the heat of that car. Because under Georgia law, if a murder is committed under such circumstances that it's sufficiently wanton, vile, tortuous, things of that nature, it can elevate it to potentially a death penalty case. So that is why they are so very, very interested in exactly how the child died and under what circumstances.
As more disturbing details about the father of the Georgia toddler who died in a hot car, PayPal says it will give refunds to everyone who donated to a fundraiser for the family. And the site that hosted the campaign has taken it down. Much of the focus in the wake of the death of little Cooper Harris has revolved around his mother, Leanna Harris, and whether she could also face charges. She's not been named as a suspect in the case, but did hire a defense attorney this week. And even though many people say there's something suspicious about her, one CNN commentator says she should not be scrutinized by police, but not indicted by the public before the facts come out. Philip, on that, we know that some of her online activity were also suspicious. Should police be looking at her, and why don't they just name her as a suspect or possible suspect?
They're playing their cards very close to the vest. Most people, I think, who have followed this case very closely are quite clear on the fact that she is being looked at, and she is being looked at very closely. Jane is correct, and a lot of people have noticed that she invited a lot of this attention to herself by a lot of these comments that have certainly raised eyebrows, to say the least. On the one hand, at the funeral, she said she would not bring back Cooper if she could, yet she said she would also have another child with Ross if possible. So she made a decision, and she made a conscious choice to go to that funeral and to say those things. Now, let's talk about her having a lawyer for just a minute. Let's be careful and not read a whole lot into that. I've had people hire me who were simply under investigation and who were never charged, and they hire a lawyer if for no other reason than to find out more about the process, to have someone who's a professional to guide them through the ups and downs of the process and to help to understand it. So we can't really infer anything one way or the other into the fact that she's hired herself a good lawyer.
Tennessee has become just the first state to legislate that forcible entry can be used if the person that discovers a child locked in a car has already called 911 and sees no other way to free that child. Philip, that's all well and good for Tennessee, but it sounds like we need laws on the books to police up common sense. Is that even possible?
It's very difficult to legislate and to police up common sense. That law in Tennessee is fine and good. I don't really think it's necessary, because in an emergency, you can do pretty much anything you need to do to save somebody's life. I don't really care how many windows need to be broken out or how many doors need to be forced open. If you see a person or an animal or something like that in a car and there's really no other way to get to that child, there is no jury in the world that's going to convict you of a crime if you bust out the window to save a life.
And despite, Philip, the amount of attention that we are giving this summer, the numbers for the deaths, at least, is not particularly high given previous years. Last year, I believe there were 34 deaths. The year before, 44, I believe. Does there need to be, I mean, it's good that we're focusing on it, and does there need to be a law that says we just don't allow kids to stay in cars at all. Parents, if you leave your kid in their car for even a minute, that's a crime.
My personal opinion is that we don't need to necessarily have these knee-jerk reactions to over-legislate common sense things. It is already against the law, I know in Georgia, to create a condition that could potentially lead to the harm or even the death of a child, reckless conduct, anything like that could actually fit the circumstances. It's very, very dangerous when you pass laws that are absolute, that say there are no exceptions under any circumstances. I get the point. We don't need to leave children in cars. It's absolutely imperative that we educate the public, and I think going to what Jane said, I think perhaps technology might be the way to go. I don't know that I feel so strongly about absolute laws.
All right, with all this awful news about children being left in hot cars, you might think it's illegal to leave a minor in such a dangerous spot in the first place. However, only 19 states have laws against it, but there are actually more cases, or are we simply more aware of it? Can we become too quick? Our over-focus on these cases, can we become too quick to start charging and casting aspersions?
It is possible to do that. I can tell you a personal story of my own. When I was 4 years old, my mother went to town to go shopping, and I did not want her to leave without me, so I snuck into the station wagon and I hid behind the seat in the hot July sun in South Georgia for over 40 minutes while my mother went in there to shop. Needless to say, she was absolutely mortified, petrified, scared to death when she found me almost in hyperthermia. And a few minutes longer, I may not be sitting here to talk to you today, and I would have hated for my mother to have been investigated and prosecuted for something under those circumstances.
All right. And Philip, I mean, other than your very moving personal story, I take it you do not believe that that we need sort of a federal law or some way to to up the ante against parents who leave kids, especially younger kids or older kids, in the car.
I think that the states are more than capable of coming up with their own solutions. I think that what you have to look at is what is reasonable under the totality of the circumstances. You know, if you have a child who's in the back seat, maybe taking a nap, they're asleep in their car seat, and you pull into your garage and you need to take a few things into the kitchen before you wake up your child to take them inside, that's not necessarily unreasonable under the totality of the circumstances. So if you have a law that says it's against the law to do that even for an instant, that would not make sense. Laws need to make common sense. They need to be rational, the way that they are applied in real life. And so I don't think anything like a federal law necessarily is in order, but I think states are more than capable of creating reasonable solutions under their own laws.
It's the Philip, always let a sleeping baby lie law. Thank you very much. Very, very sensible, I think. Well, there is no question it's been a tough week for children, and as we heard about several disturbing cases about kids, take a case of a 7-month-old baby left on a subway platform here in New York this week. The woman who found the little girl told HLN's Dr. Drew she could see the child's mother inside the train looking out at them as the train pulled away. Or the case of a 12-year-old Detroit boy who was found barricaded in his father's basement, forced to do 100 push-ups, 200 sit-ups, and 100 jumping jacks each day. It was basically torture. He told the FBI he'd been punched by his stepmother, who said, "I can," quote, "make you disappear." Let's talk about all these cases. Philip, these cases are shocking to say the least. You can't legislate against bad parenting, I suppose, but is there something that can be done at the local or at the state or at the federal level to change behavior in some way?
And you can't legislate against stupidity either. You know, with the situation with the lady in the subway, obviously, it doesn't seem that she had any intention to harm her child, but she did put her child in harm's way. A subway station in New York City is no place for a baby to be left unattended. There's all sorts of sexual predators out there. There's people that would harm the child. Anything could have happened to that child. So, yes, I think she should be prosecuted if those allegations are true. You compare that to the situation in Detroit. If what the little boy is telling the authorities turns out to be true, that's just sadistic. You know, that's not anything that you can legislate against. No law in the world is going to prevent someone from being a sadist, a sociopath, or a psychopath who feels no empathy for other human beings, let alone their children.